Are we good to go? I think we're live. I'm looking for G. There he is. Hey, man.
I missed the introduction.
You just hanging out, huh?
I'm just hanging out.
Yeah.
Shall we start this thing?
I mean, I think whoever's here is ready for the party. So.
All right. So we were going to introduce each other. So I'm going to start. My name is Greg Neri, otherwise known as G. Neri, and I'm the author of the recently released Polo Cowboy, which we're going to get into, which is a sequel to Concrete Cowboy, which we'll get into. And I've known E for quite a few years, and we're going to deep dive into her threequel with Fat Angie. But before that, I was thinking like how best to define the spirit of E. Charlton-Trujillo. And yes, I could talk about the writing, I could talk about the words, I could talk about the deep commitment to at-risk kids. But to me, it's all about the spirit and willingness to kind of dive into the deep end of the unknown and just kind of revel in it. And I think about this time a few years ago when I was invited to go to Monroeville, Alabama, the deepest South you could get. And I did a book called True Now, which is about the childhood friendship between Harper Lee and Truman Capote, right here. And I was going to give a talk in the actual courthouse from To Kill a Mockingbird. And E's reaction was like, "Oh, we should make a movie about that." And immediately I was like, yes, let's do it. And next thing I know, it's like a road trip. We show up, and there could not be any more two of an odd couple than us walking into that small town in the South. Like, what the heck? Who are these people? And we immediately started filming, and you could see like a police car kind of trailing us off in the distance. And you could feel like this vibe of the town, like, oh, there's strangers amongst us. Like a real sense of distrust, like, who are these people? What are they doing? And even the next morning we woke up, there was like this live bullet standing next to our car, like, y'all might not want to stay here too long. But I feel like, E's attitude is so full of energy and joy that, you can turn anything around. And within like a day and a half, I felt like we had won that town over to the point where they were inviting us over to their house, when y'all coming back? And it could have easily gone the other way. We could have easily been run out of town. Had it just been me, that probably would have happened. So to me, the best way I could think of to introduce you is just that energy that you have that's just like can win anybody over. And that goes all the way into the writing and the books. And I've seen the reaction that you get from kids who've read your books. And that's truly kind of like the best way I can introduce you.
You do realize, though, that I found the bullet. This is the disputed. See, he always says he found the bullet, but so he was at the hotel and he's looking down. I said, man, there's a bullet by the car. He's like, but he spins the story in public that he found the bullet. So to this day, it's the ongoing toss-up.
I have the bullet. So.
True, that's true. And he also has the coveted video of me dancing in the ham outfit.
So we were in the courthouse and rummaging through the back, and there was the actual full-size ham costume from the To Kill a Mockingbird play. And he, of course, first thing puts it on. And of course I film it.
I didn't know he was filming. And then later, like, he gets to the end of that movie, that little short film we made, and you see it right there in the credits as me dancing as the ham. So forever memorialized. Now, so I have my experience of Greg, and like to know Greg Neri, the man, the myth, the legend, is to know that Greg, despite his calm, relaxed, jovial ways, he is a man of immense compassion. I always think of him as the original outsider. We have a shared love of S.E. Hinton's book. And I always think of him in his writing. He's on the outside, but he's also on the inside. Like he's in both, getting both angles of that lens. And he's always looking for a way to channel that energy into young people, into their voices, and into their stories. Now I'm going to continue with my proper version of Greg for a moment, because Greg is also a man who is an activist of change on the page, off the page. There are few juvenile detention centers in this country that don't know the stories, the books, and the tenacity of my friend, the original troublemaker outsider, Greg Neri. Because his work of his heart is, he goes to those places because he believes in story and in elevating young people out of hard situations. And that takes a lot of courage as someone who's been in those places and gone to work with those kids. He often writes about young people on the fringe of society, much like him, a bit of an outsider, a bit of a troublemaker, looking for some trouble. And he writes about young people on the margins, and he does so in such a way to celebrate their joy and their struggle, but I think most of all, their possibility. And I think in a world of hard, we need that, and young people need that. Now, he has, of course, won coveted literary awards. None of us are really concerned about that at the moment, but it's true. It's true. This has happened. He has served on the National Book Award Committee. Okay, kind of a big deal. I mean, I don't want to admit that I carried him through that process, but that's another story entirely. Mm-hmm. He also, during the time that I've known him, he won this really coveted science national grant that put him in Antarctica. And he literally got to climb into the center of the frozen earth, right? Come on, pull it up. What do you got there? You got something? Oh, snap. That's right. You're friends. And he went to there so that he could bring story and idea to young people about that experience. I didn't climb into the frozen earth, y'all. I'm just going to be clear about it. In fairness of all other things, he is a poet. He's a musician. He's a father. He's a son. He's a brother. He's a friend. He is a teacher. He is a learner. He is someone who listens and opens doors. And when I think of people that I would go into a literary battle or a life battle with, it would be this guy, because that's who Greg is. Now,
and I would say the same thing for you too.
Now, what you need to know is he is the biggest jokester you can ever know. Don't trust this face here. This face of his is nothing but trouble. And he is also someone who can spin a story so fast that you go, wait, are you serious? Are you serious? Like, is this the leg that you're pulling right out from under me? And he was also, in his younger days, as I pull up here on the iPad in the introduction of Greg Neri, you must all know this, he was an official skate rat. That's right. Look at this man, everybody. Exposed in Los Angeles, skating the pools illegally. Doing the trouble, cutting through. That's right. Truths are revealed today.
Now, I won't talk about the trouble that you got into as a kid, because those are some pretty epic stories, kind of like The Outsiders, maybe a park burned down, something like that. I'm not going to get into that.
It might have been a fire. The fire
might have been a fire. But all these stories and everything get channeled into our work. And that is what we're going to talk about tonight, particularly in regards to sequels.
Yes.
And in your particular case, threequels, which is like a special, status. I think, like, I wrote a sequel, but to write a threequel is an extra added bonus. So why don't we start at the beginning with Fat Angie? Like, what was that initial spark that fused behind this character? Did you always just see it as one book in the beginning?
Right. So Fat Angie, literally her journey began in a snowy diner in Madison, Wisconsin. I'd just eaten the poor man's plate of food. It's what I could afford. I was so broke. And it was like those super high snow stacks outside. And I had this brick of an iPod Classic, and I rolled it over and I landed on Lenny Kravitz's "Are You Gonna Go My Way?" And I put on the headphones, and all of a sudden that opening riff of his guitars, when he is playing, I could just feel the beat, the pulse of that scene, that first scene in the book. And then from that moment, I just borrowed a pen, I grabbed the napkins, and I just started writing on the napkins. And I had never been so grateful not to wash a napkin in my clothes. Like that literally would have destroyed everything, because I wouldn't have retained the energy. But it was that moment through music, and Lenny Kravitz himself is nowhere in that book. Like he's not present as a physical storyline. It's the energy of how art can feed art. And this, how it channels and can speak to us in our creation of characters. So there's always that moment, that dramatic center, that thing that goes pop, that sparks. And from that moment, she was born from just that feeling.
You literally like kind of saw the character, even though you didn't know who she was, what the story was. You just kind of.
I let it go. And and of course, this was a time that, I feel like, when I was, it's like, it feels like I'm telling an old school story, but this was a time literally when books like Fat Angie were not really prominent in publication. We didn't have books celebrating body and shape and queer love, and books that were like, they were kind of funny, but then they're kind of romantic, but then they're really kind of hard because there's all these emotional pieces too. And so I was writing something that wasn't on the shelf, and that's scary, because it's not like I felt like, oh, I'm going to be a groundbreaker. I was like, oh, snap, I'm going to get shut down, or no one's going to read it. It's just going to disappear. And so there was a real fear about that. There was no Dumplin', Julie Murphy's Dumplin'. There was no Gabby Girl in Pieces. There was not, the other day I was talking to Crystal Maldonado. There was no, Fat Chance, Charlie Vega. There was literally very few books portraying young, big girls who can be loved for exactly who they are, and not for having to lose weight to be loved, right? And so, totally, it was totally absolutely unexpected, but I have forever cherished that song. And I showed up to a school visit a couple of times, and the teachers jacked up that song when I walked in. I was like, yeah, Lenny Kravitz.
So do you feel like her as a character helped you kind of take that leap of faith to do the book and not like doubt whether or not it would find its way into the world?
I think her as a character helped me take that leap of faith as a writer, but I think there was also, part of it was a little bit of ignorance. A lot of writers know the market. I didn't know market. I was a filmmaker, that, like you and I both, we come from that background. And so I didn't know like quote market, but once it started to get closer to publication, there was a fear of it because there was queerness. And I thought there was a time, it's not like now, it's just so different. The book came out in 2013. The first one. So, it's written prior to that, because, you know how publishing is. It's like publishing, you sell that book in probably 2010, 2011, something like that, because there's like X amount of years in between. So in 2013, when that came out, it was still, we didn't even have, we need diverse books at that point. We didn't have that as an organization. We were not thinking in terms of that in the same way. And so part of how Greg and I got to know each other was through Fat Angie, was through a movie that came from a tour about Fat Angie, where I traveled America. And I went out, and instead of like, it wasn't a book tour in the sense where you're trying to sell the book, like, here's my book, it's about such and such, it's $16.95. Like, I wish I was good at that thing. But the thing that I was good at was sacrificing some of my time and well, considerable amount of I was very humbled by that trip, and going out and talking to young people in homeless shelters and after school programs and juvenile detention centers and traditional schools and alternative schools and all that, about the idea of what story is and what it can be like this. And it was that's when I started to believe, was when I was filming and I was meeting these kids and educators and authors all over the country, and we're having these conversations. I'm like, wait, this is something people want to talk about. I don't need to be afraid, right? I don't need to be afraid. And then I was like, I think there's something here. And that was that moment where he's like, click, Yeah.
Now, did you think of it that all the way through writing that first one, like, oh, you never thought that there would be a second one, let alone a third one?
No.
Like, when did that?
No.
Kind of.
No. So, you have that real high from the travel and at summer and you're making the film. And then of course, snap, winning this ALA award, I was like, y'all don't even understand, y'all. Like literally, if it hadn't, Amy King, literally, AS King texted me on California time. I was crashing on people's couches and I was still traveling. And she says, dude, congratulations. And I said, dude, what did I do? I had no idea. It was on CNN. It was everywhere. And it was like 5 a.m. She's like, dude, you just won the Stonewall Award. And I was like, dude, is that a good thing? So, but yeah, you know, and even at that point, like you win this coveted, beautiful award, your book gets so much energy, and young people are reading and they're having conversations, and some really hate it and some really love it, you know, and all this thing is happening, but they're talking, right? They're talking. And, but as far as the sequel, it was two-pronged. One, I had started the sequel even before the first was ever sold, but I threw it away and didn't even think about it, just put it in the back. Then I told Pat Zelo Miller, who's an acclaimed picture book author, hey, I started this sequel about it. She goes, wait, there's a sequel to Van Angie? I was like, yeah, but you know, I don't know. And so anyway, after a series of conversations and her like narking onto me, my agent and I talking, and then we're like, I was like, is this really a story that we can continue? Because it wasn't, you know how it is when you write the first book, you wrote Ghetto Cowboy. Remember? Like, wait, listen. Yeah, you remember Ghetto Cowboy. So, but to go from, you know, because there was a time between you and Ghetto Cowboy, right? From the first to the current.
Yeah, big
like,
time.
How many years?
So that was like, so Ghetto Cowboy came out in 2011. And
wow,
it was one of those books that kind of kept going, you know, had a life of its own. And kids really got into it and kept asking, like, when are you going to do another one? When are you going to do another one?
Mm-hmm.
But I didn't really have another story for that world. And that world was inspired by a real place in North Philadelphia, a neighborhood called Strawberry Mansion that I happened to stumble across, where there was this whole world of Black urban cowboys going on that was pretty kind of special. Guys who had been rescuing ex-racehorses from the slaughterhouse and bringing them back to this neighborhood that most people considered to be the most dangerous neighborhood in the city. And it was totally kind of neglected and kind of off the radar. But not only were they rescuing these animals and turning vacant houses and empty lots into stables and corrals, they were actually giving the horses to the young people in these neighborhoods because, you know, high crime, high gang activity, give them a horse, it's a full-time job, they won't have time to get in trouble. And slowly started transforming young people's lives. And it's been going on for decades and decades. And that, you know, was pretty special because nobody had written about it at that time. I mean, you could Google it or whatever the search engine was in 2009, and literally nothing would come up, and which is pretty hard to do these days. And so I talk a lot about changing the narrative because I run into a lot of kids who, you know, have, you know, their lives are hard and they feel like they're being characterized in certain ways, and that causes a lot of anger and frustration. And I always say, you know, you can't blame people for thinking how they think if that's the only story they know.
Exactly.
And so if you want people to change how they perceive you, you have to change the narrative. And so Ghetto Cowboy started off as a way to change the narrative from the most dangerous place in the city to like one of the most amazing places that should be celebrated in the city. And you know, and it kind of shined a light on a community that, you know, wasn't getting any light or love. And the city was always trying to shut them down. And you know, at one point there were about 800 Black cowboys in the city, and slowly dwindling. But in that case, you know, I wrote the book, started going around with it, and, you know, Black cowboys and cowgirls started coming out of the woodworks everywhere I went, you know, New York to Los Angeles, Seattle, Chicago to St. Louis, just like everywhere. And so what I thought was something that was only happening in one place turned out to be happening all over. So the sequel really came about because kids were always like, and they started writing little fan fiction
Uh-huh.
endings, because my book ended with this open ending with this race between Cole, who's the star, and his dad, and you don't know who wins, and that's kind of the point. But kids like, who won the race? And so they started writing the endings, and they were all like, you should write about this, and you should continue it this way. And then one kid I heard from named Chris, who lives in North Philly, kind of started talking about this other barn, which housed the only African-American polo team, which is just like, if you know anything about polo, it's like this white kind of posh king of sports kind of thing. And the idea of these Black urban kids playing that sport, in real life, that barn, they started off as the Bad News Bears, but ended up becoming national champions. And then they have this amazing story. But that just kind of became a spark, because what I thought about was kind of like taking Cole, this cowboy kid, and what if he kind of fell for this girl who was also a horse person, but played polo, kind of came from the other side of the tracks. Yeah, it's kind of like a West Side Story kind of thing going on. But really, both these characters are outsiders. This girl is going to school at this military academy that has this polo team, and she's the first girl in the academy. She's the first Black girl on this team, and she also has the skin disease called vitiligo, which she's literally turning white, losing her pigment in her skin. So she has a lot of issues that she's grappling with. So, the thing I think we have in common is that we write about outsider kids. And, I think that's the thing we both relate to. We both see ourselves as, and why we love The Outsiders, the original. And that we are just kind of taken by this idea of being on the outside and trying to find out, where you fit in this world. Like, where do you belong? What is your place? And that's like a common theme that we both have.
Let's talk about something that really specific in what you said, because now we have a sort of overview of that particular kind of series, right? And with yours, we have where we go. With Angie's, we go from, the first book, about a girl who really doesn't fit, who is the object of bullying at home, at school. She's a joke. She's attempted suicide prior to the book starting, and steps into her power and strength through basketball, finds queer love, and also experiences great loss. Then we come to book 2, which, I used to say it's kind of like the Breakfast Club on wheels, but more diverse, right? So we move into a story of loss, and how do you recover from loss and grief, mothers and daughters in struggle, and then the road trip, of course, that's part of the narrative, right? And she's moving closer to empowerment. And then in book 3, we move into full on, absolute, badass, fantastic, not going to sit on the side anymore, Angie, who's finally finding her voice creatively and in her story and in her life, right? So we have this sort of arc. Now, when you look at yours specifically, because I want to talk about this. With yours, you wrote book 1. I don't think you really knew until the kids were really pushing that you were going to try book 2. Talk a little bit about the real struggles of writing a sequel.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because it's not something I never thought I would be like a series writer, because if you do a series, you envision that from the start. So you plan it out, you plan the arc of that first book, but also the overall arc and how many books, whatever. But I've always been about writing kind of singular stories, boom, boom, boom. And so you have to kind of wrap your head around this idea. But what I noticed when I said like, oh, that's interesting, and I had this general idea and I just start writing, like, even though at that point, probably 6 years passed, 7 years between when I wrote the first one. And it really is like visiting old friends. If you haven't seen each other for a long time, you sit down, you immediately jump back into it. Even though you haven't thought about them or been close or talked to them even, like, it's very easy to kind of fall into a conversation, to catch up, like know where they're at, kind of know them on a deep level. And so that I picked up literally at the end of the first book and just started writing. Now, of course, the other thing we have in common is that because we were both writing these books at the same time, and we both kind of wrote drafts. I wrote a couple of drafts that kind of stopped halfway through because they were just, it was just so much stuff in it. Like, because I start researching, I get into polo and all these stories. And I know that if I write the way I'm writing, the sequel is going to be twice as big as the first one. You can't do that. And I thought I'd go back and re-envision it, simplify it, just like, but then even that version turned out to be big, it's huge.
I remember.
And I kept going back and forth, and I just was kind of like, I already sold it. We both have the same publisher too.
Yes, we both sold them before they were written.
And then I kind of just stopped, and I was kind of like, I don't know. And you were struggling.
I was.
At the same time, but the thing that I think saved both our books was we kind of was like, I'm ready to drop this. Yeah. And then we just started having fun because we started joking about it. You know what you should do? It should be a book about this. Or just
yes, I remember.
And I would be like, oh, you know, it'd be a good scene in this book. It's like just like these totally outrageous scenes. Like, oh, that would be so great. But there's no way you could actually do that. I mean, you couldn't justify it. You couldn't set it up. And at one point, I mean, we just were having fun talking about it. It was funny, and it was kind of like, oh, yeah.
Right.
Too bad we couldn't do that. At one point, I was just like, well, why can't we do that? Like, why can't we write just these awesome scenes? Like, I would like to see that, even though I don't know how it will fit in the book or how I can justify it. It's a great scene, or that's a great scene.
And I was like, write it.
Yeah. So I found myself in a secluded spot in upstate New York with like a week. And I thought, you know what? I'm just going to speed write this. I'm going to throw everything away, like hundreds of pages, all this research. I'm going to throw everything away and just start from scratch. I had been recently to North Philadelphia again for the first time for the movie we were filming. And that kind of like made me see it again in a fresh way. And I went to go visit this military academy where they had the horses. And then I just sat down. It's like, you know what? I don't care. I don't care. Like, I'm just going to sit down and write it and have fun and just riff and just do all these crazy things we've been talking about. Just have fun with it. And if it works, it works. If it doesn't, that's it. It's done. And I don't care if it's bad, even as I'm writing, it's like, yeah, this is the worst. I'm just going to keep going. And I just wrote it thinking like, oh, this is a hot mess. This is all over the place. It's just like horrible. And then I got to the end of it very quickly and then just let it sit for a couple of days. And I'm like, well, I guess I'm going to read this hot mess and see how awful it is. And then I realized, God, this kind of works, you know, this kind of works, like this kind of, and that draft became like, you know, 80% of the final story. So I think like for both of us, it was kind of like we had this buildup of too many, like overthinking it pretty much.
That's the big thing is you can't.
And that like shutting us down.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right because, you know, the luxury of those, like you said, who planned it, who came into this knowing they have a 3-book deal or a 2-book deal to do a duology. They know what they're getting into. They know what they're coming to. It's like a television series. They built the arc. You know, a great series builds past season 1. You assume you will get to season 2, right? And you're building. If you're a planner, neither one of us did that. And so we literally come in there like, we can tell this story. We can do this thing. And then it's like all of a sudden it's like, wow, for me, the pressure is, you know, you don't want to write Jaws 2. You don't want to write Free Willy 3. You don't want to write, you know, you go through all of, as a filmmaker, I think in those terms, but, you know, you don't want to tell the same story 3 times, you know, in my case, like, you know, it's not like, and so there's a pressure in that you start to kind of wonder, is it, you know, good enough? Am I going the right way? How can I trust my instincts? And that, when you let that noise in the room, that's what destroys creativity, is you have to get out of your own way. For me, I had to get out of my own way. And you, like you said, well, just write a scene and have fun. And I thought, well, what if I did have fun? That's why I started this whole gig, was to have fun and do incredible things. And so I think there's a freedom in letting yourself make a mistake and not being afraid that you will make a mistake. And that's really important, whether it's the first draft of a first book or the last draft, you know, of the final book. Like you
Yeah.
have to be
And
willing.
and it's kind of obvious, like if you're having fun with it, like, oh, you know, it'd be crazy if this
I
happened and
know.
you did it. It's like, oh, this
Yeah.
is insane. Like obviously the reader's gonna have fun with it if you
Right.
think it's great, or you know, whatever is out there.
Well, your
And so I
passion
think,
translates. Your passion
yeah,
translates.
yeah,
Right.
absolutely.
You
And so
know?
I think those conversations we had
Yeah.
were really pivotal for both these books to kind of
Mhm.
make it like there's another reality where neither of these books make it to the end. And yet, you know,
Right.
now we can hold them up and say, oh, this
Right.
is a real thing,
It's real.
actual book.
It's an
So
actual
that's
book. And
that's pretty cool. Like that journey and the fact that we were doing it parallel really
yes.
helped, you know, and kind of
The-
connects them, even though, you know, they're different books. But
You know, I
that's cool.
remember during those conversations, part of what I had asked you about, because we're, you know, at that point, I think I was writing part 3, you were writing part 2 of Polo Cowboy. And it was, I was getting really stuck somewhere in my, the logic of it wasn't working for me. I was really frustrated and I wasn't feeling it. And you have to feel your characters. You have to be, for me, I have to feel them. I have to be present. I have to be in that story. I can't just sort of tip in, like I need to commit. I'm like a method writer, right? Except, you know, to a point. but, and the thing was, I was like, I think I know where it's ending. I know where it's ending. I know where it's ending. But I was still stuck. So what I did was, I put on Post-its, every chapter and the 3 major things that happened in that chapter, right? Like whatever, you know, whatever the big issues were. And I put them all across the wall. And where I saw the gaps, I was like, you know, if it was like chapters, let's say 18 through 22, and I thought that those chapters were not working, I would put question marks or whatever. And then I had the ending. I felt good about it. I said, okay, I'm going to write in reverse. So I did something I had never done in my career of writing, is I started writing from the last chapter, even though I had like the first, like, let's say I had the first 12. And then I had like from 18, I don't know, to whatever, but I started writing backwards. And that's really tricky, because the thing is that, you know, you have to be careful that you're layering in storylines in the right order, you know, because you're paying it off. Usually that's why you go in forward, right? You're going to pay them off later. But now I'm writing in reverse. And for me, for the last book, that was the best thing I could ever do, because I wanted to write the ending. I was passionate because I knew what I wanted to say. And so I was like, well, who's going to know I wrote the ending first, as long as I do it correctly? And so then I wrote the last chapter, then I wrote the next chapter, and then that excitement created more click for me in the story, that I could come in and pave the way. I was like, that's what I'm writing to. That's the ending I'm excited about. That's the story I want to tell. And I'm on fire about it now, you know?
Yeah. And then the other thing is, you know, particularly with movies, it's like, if the first book was successful and you're doing a sequel, you want to kind of repeat the formula, just like make it bigger and more badass or whatever, which is something neither of us wanted to do. So I think like the idea of Polo Cowboy is so like, that is not something anybody would have ever thought of, like as a sequel. And so it's a real oddball, like it's kind of stands alone as its own story, which is good too. But it's what I like is that it's fresh and totally unexpected, and yet totally fits the universe still.
What do you think through this process, right? Because we were kind of in parallel experiences. What do you think you learned about yourself as a writer, but also as a human being going through this? And people say, what do you mean human being? You sold a book. Like, no.
Yeah.
I think there's a connection. I really believe it.
Yeah, I mean, the big thing is this idea of also, yeah, I mean, one is the big idea of letting go and just not caring, like getting rid of all the things that are attached to a book or a project, and not caring about this stuff, but like it reminded me, like it really is all about the story. And like you are secondary.
Yes.
Like your job is to bring the story to the world.
Yes.
And you know, forget about whatever problems you have. But so you're kind of like definitely like a parent in that way. You know, your job is to nurture it and help bring it out and send it out into the world. And then the other thing is just like accepting whatever it is it's going to be. Also a parent thing. Like you think like, okay, I'm gonna write this book's gonna be a doctor, No, it's gonna be whatever it's gonna be. Like I could
Right,
not have predicted it would become Polo Cowboy. But that's like that makes it extra special because it
right,
wasn't what I thought it was gonna
right.
be. It turned into its own thing
Mhm.
that stands on its own and is like really special because of that. It's kind of cool, you know.
I think it's interesting for me going through the three, right? And they're, from 2013 to this point now in 2021, and the world has changed a lot just in the last 2 years.
Mhm.
Um, I think it's been interesting because the more Angie was growing, I felt myself also growing,
Mhm.
and which, I could feel the shift in my own comfortableness, whether it was with how I identify in the world or how I move through the world.
Right.
And I think in book one, I can feel the ways in which I would kind of hold back some. And I look at book two and I really explore what is the layers of grief, right? Like, what is that like? And it's not always pretty and it's not always commercial, but
Mhm.
it's what's real. And then, but what is the celebration of learning that there's something about you, in you, that is worthy of being heard? And that's what I started to. And then by book three, it was just like an explosion of that. It was just like, it was just everything. And by book three, I was just like, oh my God, I get to totally live this story out loud. And that it was like watching myself grow with this,
Mhm.
with this character in her world. And I think it also showed how I wanted to move in the world when I talk with young people about their story. That's how you and I really connected, was when
Right.
around the idea of story. And and to really, we need young people to see their value and the urgency of their voices now, and
Right.
not feel like it's something they have to put on a shelf. And I think I learned that in going through this process, because that was the whole gig. A book two, when I was on tour, was I had that shirt that I'd wear where your story is a revolution, right? But the truth was, I didn't actually put it really in book two, but in book
Mhm.
three, it is in
Right.
book three, because that's what it becomes.
Right. So
So,
what kind of reactions or like personal interactions have you had with young people,
wow,
particularly who have read these books? Like,
right,
what has it meant to them, and how has that affected you back?
right. It's, the journey is partly what you grow from and doing the writing, but the real journey is what you grow from when you have the privilege of being with young people who are the readers. And it's like I said earlier, some people they're just really passionate. Like, they love this book or they really hate this book and they want to tell me why they hate it. I'm like, come on. And the best part of that is now when we're talking about it, they're like, well, I don't want to upset you. I'm like, no, no, bring it on. And then what I realized though is, at the end, it's okay that they hate my book. And I say, well, hey, you ever read G. Neri's book? Do you ever read Jason Reynolds' book? Do you ever
Mhm.
read, Ginny Torres's book? And I want them to realize, not only do I want them to read those books, but I'll say, well, what would you do? How would you tell a story similar or different? And then getting their minds thinking. And so that's part of it. And then the other piece is, you know, um, you and I have we were at NCTE a number of years ago together on this really huge stage with thousands and
Mhm.
thousands of educators, right? And it was intense, right?
Yeah.
And I told a story, and it's relevant. I was at a book festival, and book festivals are intense. And at that time, it was, I think, Divergent was very hot at that time, or the series, a planned series. And there was a line just wrapped out the door. Well, I didn't have a line out the door, but every kid that came up, like, we'd have a story, we'd engage and
Right.
whatever. But there was this one kid, and her name's Ruby. And I had told the story. She had those cute little cheeks and the glasses and the straight black hair. And she's, Chicana, this beautiful kid. Sixth grade, I think. Sixth. I feel like it was sixth or seventh. And she points to the poster behind me of Fed, and she goes, I read that book. And I'm like, did you? That's fantastic. And I was thinking, wow, she's a little young, but okay. And
Mhm.
she starts to tell me about the book, and then so on and so forth. And then she tells me about how it was brought to her in the hospital. And I'm like, oh, sweet God, this kid has probably survived cancer. Like, I'm just creating all these narratives as she's talking to me. You got to understand, like, she's like cute, chubby cheeks and a beautiful
Mhm.
face, this sweet little kind of nerdy, dorky, beautiful child. And then she just stops and she's like, yeah, they brought it to me after I was pushed down the stairs. And I was like, what? and that she had been bullied in her school and been injured and had to go into the hospital, and that someone brought her this book. And then she just fell apart, right? She starts to cry, and I was like, oh my gosh, you know. And so I get up, I ask her if she wants a hug, I give her a hug, and you know, and we talk, and I say, you know, don't tell me your full name, just tell me your school, tell me your English teacher. I'm going to send you a ton of books, and I'm going to send books that are about all kinds of things, and especially about don't push little girls down the stairs. You know, it's like, and
Yeah.
you know, but that's one kid, and that's one story of thousands of stories. But the relevance is when I was finishing Fat Angie, I thought about that kid. Like, she was always in the back of my mind. I never forgot her. And that was years ago, like what, 2016 maybe. And so like I put her in my acknowledgments. I thanked her for having the braveness, you know, and the tenacity to come and tell me that story, because it was hard for her. And that's what I've noticed with these books is it's the kids who have the hardest stories come to me, and they open up, and you have that too. You have that.
And that's part of it, is just like when you write about things on a deep level, real level, and somebody reads it, and suddenly they realize, oh, I'm not the only one who's thought this or dealt with this. And then you show up, they instantly trust you, and instantly, like we both had the experience, like within 5 minutes, telling you the deepest personal story they have, and maybe they've never told anybody, and they're telling you. And it's because you wrote that story that was so open, and vulnerable, and just like, and that connection is pretty amazing. We have it over and over and over, all over the place, which is pretty special. And that, but it also inspires. We think about those kids are, you know, kind of in various characters we write about, because they're always in our head. And certainly a lot of them are like, you should write about me and what's going on in my world. And, you know, and we do in some ways. And then we also encourage them and show them how they can write about their own world.
That's it.
Which is the big thing. So we both encourage like young people that, because they don't think they can write, or they don't think they can tell a story. And it's just like, you totally just told me your story, and I know I totally see it as amazing. So what's the difference? Instead of just telling me, you can now tell everybody. But you know, it's a big step to do that. But they see like you did it, then they're like, okay, maybe I could do it.
And it's also, I'm just going to pivot in a different direction, because our books are for all children, right? They're for all children. You don't have to be fat to get Angie. You don't have to be Black to get Cole, right? You don't have to. The whole idea is that you can be white, you can be Native, you can be Asian, right? You can, you know, the gamut of young readers. It's about, you know, this idea that we are opening opportunity to build that kind of compassion, right? And that kind of understanding, and that kind of. And so I think it's important that we acknowledge, right, that stories by you and me and by many marginalized authors are necessary, they're important, and that this idea that, well, my kid might not understand it because he doesn't live in Philly and he's not Black, or my kid's not fat, you know, or my kid's not queer, or whatever, like whatever.
Well, I think what we both do is, you know, we write in a way that allows anybody to walk in the footsteps of this character. And so both our books kind of, because the way kids judge each other and, you know, is on how people look, how they talk, with how they dress, where they're from. And, but if you kind of strip that away, that becomes secondary, and they can walk in the footsteps of somebody that's totally not like them. And yet they totally identify with what's going on with that person. It's like next level. And, you know, I learned that when I took, you know, this book to Russia, and thought like, I was sent to Russia to talk about this book. I thought like, that's great. That's not going to work. Like, do they speak English? Like, there could not be further example of Russia is not this world. And yet it turned out to be like one of the most amazing trips I had. Like, they got it in the deepest possible way you could imagine. And so it really like opened my eyes. If you tell the emotional story, like anybody can feel it. Anybody can see themselves in those
Right.
situations, and therefore it becomes universal, despite
That's it.
how the physical
That's
world
it.
is
That's
different
it.
from yours. So
That's what you just said, is the universal experience. When you're doing
yeah,
this, when you're doing this right, when it works, when it's like you know that moment where you're like, yes, this story works. It's because we universally can understand loss. We universally understand love and first love and breakups. We universally understand what it's like not to fit or to belong or to be in struggle or to
yeah,
have, all of these things are part of that. And that's the beauty of it, is the books are for everyone, not just one person or one group. They're
yeah.
for everyone, you know? What you
So
got?
we have 10 minutes left, and I don't know if there's any questions.
I think
Or
there
we can
are. Hold on.
ask each other questions.
No. I think there are questions.
Okay.
Uh, okay, we did that one. Hold on. Uh, hold on. What other voids of population of kids do you see a need for? Underserved demographics.
Um, well, I think just like stories, like we both believe there is a book that will speak to every kid out there. And it's just a
Yep.
matter of, introducing them so they find that book. And why we love teachers and librarians so much, and booksellers is like they literally put the books in the right hands.
Right.
They see who that kid is. It's like, you know what you would like. And they might not have, probably would not have found it. And yet when that happens, then there's this transference, like they read it, their mind is blown, they pass it on. Like both our books, I feel, get passed around like contraband and it's shared. And, like my books are amongst the most stolen in school libraries because, these kids like can't give it up. It's become so personal. And so, I've seen kids fight over books, or just share them. And just like in classrooms, like who are normally totally rowdy, like go so quiet you can hear a
Right.
pin drop because those stories just like suck them in an unexpected way. So I just think the more different kinds of books that we can write about all different kinds of worlds, like real worlds, real communities, real kinds of people, you're providing like a story for some kid that's going to connect with some kid who may not have found their story yet.
Do you think that do you see that our work is something like, if you're gonna, how do I say this? If we were going to talk about our work and the influences of our work, who would you say for yourself were things either you read or movies you saw or music? What's been the influence of you in coming into your work?
Well, I always like to say like real life has been my biggest inspiration, just because, once I keyed into this idea, like there's so many amazing stories and places out in the world. And one of the reasons I love to travel so much and to go to schools in places I never thought I would go is because every time you go someplace new, it changes your perception of what a place is like, or what
Yep.
people's like. And every time, even though it's like, okay, I'm going to Omaha, Nebraska, it's like, I know what that's going to be like. And then it's just totally the opposite thing.
Yep.
And one of the things I love the most is just like talking with kids and hearing about like what it's like there. Like, what do you guys eat here? What do you do? Like all these things. Because not only does it keep the writing real, the way people talk, the way they interact with each other, and the place, like the most important thing for writers is to be in the place.
Yeah.
So you can feel the vibe, feel how people talk, what they wear, what the smells are and the sounds and all that stuff totally influences how I write, more than anything, I think.
So that makes you pretty method.
Yeah, I mean, I do feel like an actor. If I am writing about something, definitely, you
Yeah.
know, particularly a certain dialect or whatever.
Yeah.
I was certainly inhabit that dialect and kind of start talking,
Nope.
you know, like
Same.
I'm from Alabama or from New York or whatever, Chicago or whatever. Yeah, so that's probably true. What about you?
You know, I think you and I write in a very similar fashion. You know, part of it is definitely, you know, a big part is the experience in the world around me. And it's interesting, when I started Fat Angie, it came from that moment with Lenny Kravitz, right? I didn't know, you know, it wasn't because I was going to be a political activist for fat people,
Right.
you know, and literally from that moment. But as the series went, as she was growing and I was growing, I was also realizing, well, now I do have something I want to say about societal views of young women and how we view, you know, Mexican American culture or mothers and daughters relationships. Then I realized there was something that I had to put there that was important. And so I think a lot of that also comes from being in the spaces. Yes, there is no Dry Falls, Ohio. It doesn't exist. That's where Angie lives, you know, so I can't visit it. But, you know, I've lived in Ohio. I've lived in the smallest towns of Ohio. And so I have a sense of, what does it smell like? What does it taste like? What is this world I'm creating? Because it has to be created from real places too.
Yeah.
And, you know, and even sometimes we can't always go there, you know, physically, but with all of the means of research, right? And you are a research fiend, like you research hardcore. And, you know, but we have to bring that truth to it, because otherwise it's fiction, but we are bringing truth to that. We are bringing, because young readers are opening that book and they're trusting us, right? Because we're not writing fantasy. They're trusting us to give them that truth. And I think that I think it's impossible not to carry the world into there for realistic young adult or middle grade fiction. Like you have to bring that world there. But it's about how you shape it from there, I guess.
Right. And do you imagine, like, for people when they read this final chapter
Yeah.
of Angie's life, I know kids love to imagine like what happens to that person, like what are they going to turn into? Do you think about like what's Fat Angie going to grow up into?
Well, yeah, because you know, like with all the books, I don't give you the Hallmark ending. I give you the ending that's hopeful and full of life, but it's definitely, you're like, wait a minute now. I mean, I think for sure, you know, the releasing virtually, because you know this now, is a very different experience, because normally I'd be out there with the kids right now. So I don't know like on the ground feelings about that yet, about this third book. But I think they're going to get to the end and be like, wait a minute. Now, wait, what? And I think there'll be some questions and some curiosities. I know from the end, they could definitely do fan fiction and they could take that story and develop it. You know, for me, for the first time, I just feel like it's I keep saying this, it's like she finally gets to be alive. And I'm just like all in herself. And I'm like, and then whatever happens next would be really interesting from a teen's point of view if they were writing it.
And I think we both like to keep those endings open, because we want people to imagine their own version of what happens to these characters. Like, how do they grow up? And usually, you know, you're kind of around the same age as that character. And if you're reading these in real time, you're kind of growing with them, and you can kind of project a little bit of yourself through them, like how they're managing and staying afloat and finding the way through the world. And you try to predict like, oh yeah, what's the next story going to be? And you know, they can just imagine what that next book's going to be.
It's interesting because I've been asked a number of times now, but you're going to write a book 3? Is there going to be a book 3? And I'm like, no, this is it. And they're like, what? And they're, you know, for some people who've read it, but, and I'm like, no, this is the ending, because now I know in my heart that my girl is good. She's gonna be all right. And I know that the kids who read it, it's gonna, whatever's not all right for them, they have a safe place to go in this series, you know.
And I feel like Paul is that way too. Like he's gotten himself to a place where he's found a bit of empowerment, and there's like a interesting possibility for his future.
Right.
And it's full of all kinds of, you know, good and bad things, but there's like a path of possibility for him, which I think Angie also shares. And I think our time is just about up here.
It is. But before we wrap completely up, I just want to say, one, thank you to everyone who came today. And 2, I want to thank Nowhere Bookshop for hosting us.
Yes,
But
absolutely.
3, I want to wish everyone a happy Stranger Things Day. Everybody who's following that hashtag, they know. And obviously everyone that knows that, who was the star of your adaptation of Ghetto Cowboy?
Caleb McLaughlin.
That's right.
Star of Stranger Things.
There you go. You know,
Country Cowboy, available on Netflix. So I mean, before you watch Stranger Things or whatever.
Yeah, you should definitely go to Concrete Cowboy.
Concrete Cowboy first, because man, he brings it. He brings it.
He does actually
in this movie. So
he does. He does.
Very proud of him.
Yeah, no, definitely. So I'm looking for our moderator to pop in from the bookshop, and
and we both have websites. You can find us online.
Yeah, totally.
Neri.com.
Yep. And Charlton-Trujillo.com.
Right there. Pretty easy.
Yeah, it's pretty easy. Or in social media at Pinata Director.
Yeah.
Hi guys, thank you so much for coming. Thank you for everyone who joined us in the chat and had questions, interacted with us. Thank you, E and G. This was such a really fun conversation. Thank you for the work you do. It's really important, these stories that you guys are getting out there, and we really appreciate it. Thank you for working with us. Anyone who's here watching in the chat, if you have not gotten books, you can come into the store, visit us at 5154 Broadway, or you can order at nowherebookshop.com anytime. And we will also have personalized and signed copies of all of EE books in stock, which you can get as well. So thank you guys for joining us. This was really, really fun. I appreciate it so much. Thank you.
One last thing before you hit stop and record. If you're still here in the chat, we are doing giveaways if you came. So if you get a message from Nowhere Bookshop, because I have a feeling they have a way to track people who said yes, I think you may be a lucky winner. And the surprise will be, well, you'll see. So there you go, everyone. Thank you so much.
Thanks. You guys have a good afternoon.
Bye.
Bye.